Ooh. I just never turned that book into the library. They ain't gonna let me ever come back. Ooh. All right. All right then. May peace and power and elevation be to all of you. This your girl Tiffany coming through live in effect right here on the StreamYard. So also if you are on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe to that channel. If you are on Facebook, go ahead and share this video. So today we're going to be dealing with the history, right? And also if you like what I'm doing, just go ahead and make sure you support that Cash App, Real Talk. I really appreciate that. If you want to go ahead and support this channel and what I'm doing. All right. So today we're going to be dealing with the history about Alice Haley, right? So many people don't know much about Alice Haley. He was the one that helped to he co-written Malcolm X autobiography, the autobiography of Malcolm X as told to Alice Haley, and he also written the book of The Roots, which is also there was a movie that came out pertaining to the book that he wrote. But anyways, let's go ahead and deal with some daily quotes. And before I get started, so out this book right here, Yasasim by Baba Baruti. Okay. So today is August 11th. It says slavery attempts to make a man a beaut. It treats him as a beast. Its terrible work is not finished until the ruined victims of its lust and pride and avarice and hatred is reduced so low that with tearful eyes and feeble voice he faintly cries, I am happy and contented. I love this condition. Henry Highland Garnett. It goes on to say conscious African make a distinction between slave and people who are enslaved. Slavery produced a mental dysfunction in which individuals see themselves as the property of those who control them. Slaves believe in the correctness of their oppression and exploitation and are willing participant in it. Enslaved individuals understand that they are only captives and only physically bound until they are able to free themselves. They are constantly at war with against those who detain and oppress them. Most Africans were not slaves. They were enslaved. That has changed. There is a noticeable disturbing trend and ongoing escalation in the proportion of Africans suffering from intense level of genocidal self-hatred. The process of our Europeanization is continuing to increasingly wreak havoc on African minds. Warriors must know the problem and its source in order to stop it. The wisdom of Africa teaches us that when a reed is bent too far in one direction, it will have to bend even further in the other direction in order for it to again become straight. I reject all form of slavery. Now, this is the quote that comes from the book of Inyasasin. All right, so let me go ahead and get started. So, who was Alice Haley? And what does he look like? Well, let me show you. Okay, this is Alice Haley right here. All right. So let's give an account of his biography. All right. So Alexander Murray Palmer Haley, who was born August 11th of 1921, and he died in February 10th of 1992. was an American writer and the author of the 1976 book Roots, the Saga of an American Family. ABC adapted the book as a television miniseries of the same name and aired it in 1977 to a record-breaking audience of 130 million viewers. In the United States, the book and the miniseries raised the public awareness of Black American history and inspired a broad interest in genealogy and family history. And it's like his first book was the autobiography of Malcolm X, published in 1965, a collaboration through numerous lengthy interviews with Malcolm X. Okay, so he actually wrote the book. He was working on a second family history novel at his death. Haley had requested that David Stevens, a screenwriter, complete it. The book was published as Queen, the Story of an American Family. It was adapted as miniseries Alice Haley Queen, broadcast in 1993. So you guys, let me show you what the book is. Okay, because I have the books in my hand. So this is the book that he wrote in 1965, the autobiography of Malcolm X, right? Okay, it's basically the interviews that he had with Malcolm, and Malcolm was telling his story, so he transcribed those interviews into a book. So, all right. And this is the book I have also, The Roots, that was written by Alice Haley. So I have not really actually read the book thoroughly, but if you really read into it, it talks about, a boy whose name was Kenta Kute or Kenta. What was his name? What was the pastor's name in the book? Benta Kente. His name was Kente, and when he got to America, he had to change his name. So he came out of Central West Africa. So pretty much Alice Haley was on point as far as like the origin of the African Americans and how we came about. But there was controversy pertaining to this book as well. But yeah, this was his book, and this is what the one that he wrote, the most famous book that became. Yep. And I believe this book was written in. It was written in 1974. Yeah, this book was written in 1974. I'm sorry, it was written in 1976. My bad. Yep. So this is the book. So, all right. So let's continue. Okay. Peace, sister, peace. I never read the book called Queen, so I'm gonna have to look into that. But I'm curious as to see what that book is about. Queen. All right. Let's go ahead and continue with his story. All right. So here it is. This is Alice Haley's boyhood home at Henny, Tennessee. Yeah, this is one of the houses he grew up in Tennessee. But anyways, Alice Haley was born in Ithaca, New York on August 11, 1921, and was the oldest of three brothers. The other two being George and Julius, and a half sister from his father's second marriage. All right. Haley lived with his family in Henning, Tennessee, before returning to Ithaca with his family when he was 5 years old. Haley's father was Simon Haley, a professor of agriculture at Alabama A&M University, and his mother was Bertha George Haley, who had grown up in Henny. The family had African, Mendika, Cherokee, Scottish, and Scottish-Irish roots. The younger Haley always spoke proudly of his father and the obstacles of racism he had overcome. Like his father, Alice Haley was enrolled at age 15 in Alcorn State University, a historically black college in Mississippi. A year later, enrolled at Elizabeth City State College. Oh, also historically black in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. The following year, he withdrew from college. His father felt that Alice needed discipline and growth and convinced him to enlist in the military when he turned 18. So on May 24, 1939, Alice Haley began what became a 20-year career in the United States Coast Guard. All right. So far we know that he went to two historically black colleges. He went to Alcorn State University, which is located in Mississippi, and Elizabeth City State College, all right, which is in North Carolina. So, and then he ended up being enlisted into the military. All right, but let's go ahead and continue on. Haley traced back his maternal ancestry through genealogical research to Jurith. I mean, what's it? Jufarith. Let's look that up. Jufarith. What is Jufarith? All right, so Jufarith. Jufari is a town in the Gambia, 30 kilometers inland of the north bank of the River Gambia in the North Bank Division near James Islands. The town is home to a museum and fourth Julie Free. Okay, Julie Rift is best known for its appearance in Alice Haley's 1976 novel Roots, the saga of an American family, as the birthplace of Haley's ancestor Kunta Kinte. After the publication of Roots, Julie Rift became a significant tourist destination. This led to economic benefits for the town, including the construction of an elementary school, a new market aimed at tourists, and improved roads. In 1951, a small plot of land from the village was leased by Jacob Killer, the Duke of Corlin, from the King of Combo as a part of the Coronian colonization of Africa. All right. So Jufaril was a town, or is a town in Gambia. All right, never heard of that place before. Okay, so let's continue. All right, so this is Alice Haley right here when he was in the Coast Guard in the military. Okay. Yeah, I have never got a chance to see that. I never got a chance to see that, Candy. The docu-series, the mini series about Queen. I have to look into it because that's my first time ever hearing about that. But yeah, I will look into that. All right. It says Haley enlisted as a mess attendant. Later, he was promoted to the rate of petty officer third class in the rating of Stewart, one of the few ratings opens to black at that time. It was during his service in the Pacific theaters of operation that Haley taught himself the craft of writing stories. During his enlistment, other sailors often paid him to write love letters to their girlfriends. He said that the greatest enemy he and his crew faced during their long voyage was not the Japanese forces, but rather boredom. After World War II, Haley petitioned the U.S. Coast Guard to allow him to transfer into the field of journalism. By 1949, he had become the petty officer first class in the rating of journalists. He later advanced to chief petty officer and held this rank until his retirement from the Coast Guard in 1959. He was the first chief journalist in the Coast Guard. The rating have been expressly created for him in recognition of his literary ability. All right. Then it says Haley's award and decoration from the Coast Guard include the Coast Guard Good Conduct Medal with 1 silver and 1 bronze service star, American Defense Service Medal with SEAL collapse, American Campaign Medal, Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal, European African Middle Eastern Campaign Medal, World War II Victory Medal, Career Service Medal, National Defense Service Medal, United Nations Service Medal, and the Coast Guard Expert Marksmanship Medal. Further, the Republic of Korea awarded him the War Service Medal 10 years after he died. So that was a lot of medals that he received while he joined the service. That was a lot of medals. All right. So this is when he started his literary career. So after retiring from the U.S. Coast Guard, Haley began another phase of his journalism career. He eventually became a senior editor for Reader's Digest magazine. Haley wrote an article for the magazine about his brother's George struggle to succeed as one of the first Black students at a Southern law school. Oh, Playboy magazine. Oh, let's see this. Haley conducted the first interview for Playboy magazine. Haley elicited candidate comments from jazz musician Miles Davis about his thoughts and feelings on racism in an interview he had started but not finished for Show Business Illustrated, another magazine created by Playboy founder Huff Hefner that folded in early 1962. Haley completed the interview and it appears in Playboy's September 1962 issues. That interview set the tone for what became a significant feature of the magazine. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.'s Playboy interview with Haley was the longest he ever granted to any publication. Oh, so he did the interview working for Playboy magazine, the same magazine that promotes, nudity and women, sexual expression and stuff like that. Yeah, the same magazine. Yeah, that magazine. But I ain't never thought that magazine would be talking about racism though. It's interesting. Anyways, throughout the 1960s, Haley was responsible for some of the magazine's most notable interviews, including one with George Lincoln Rockwell, leader of the American Nazi Party. He agreed to meet with Haley only after gaining assurance from the writer that he was not Jewish. Haley remained professional during the interview, although Rockwell kept a handgun on the table throughout it. The interview was recreated in The Roots, The Next Generation, with James Earl Jones as Haley and Marlon Brando as Rockwell. Haley also interviewed Muhammad Ali, who spoke about changing his name from Cassius Clay. Other interviews include Jack Ruby's defense attorney, Melvin Belly, entertainer Sammy Davis Jr., football player Jim Brown, TV host Johnny Carson, and music producer Quincy Jones. So he had a lot of work doing interviews for Playboy. Yeah. All right, then. Let's go on and talk about how he ended up with Malcolm X and doing his autobiography. So the autobiography of Malcolm X, published in 1965, was Haley's first book. It describes the trajectory of Malcolm X's life from street criminal to national spokesman for the Nation of Islam to his conversion to Sunni Islam. It also outlines Malcolm X's philosophy of Black pride, Black nationalism, and Pan-Africanism. Haley wrote an epilogue to the book summarizing the end of Malcolm X's life, including his assassination in New York's Audubon Ballroom. Haley Ghost wrote the autobiography of Malcolm X based on more than 50 depth interviews he conducted with Malcolm X between 1963 and Malcolm X's February 1965 assassination. The two men had first met in 1960 when Haley wrote an article about the Nation of Islam for Reader Digest. They met again when Haley interviewed Malcolm X for Playboy. The initial interviews For the autobiography frustrated Haley rather than discussing his own life. Malcolm X spoke about Elijah Muhammad, the leader of the Nation of Islam. He became angry by Haley's reminders that the book was supposed to be about Malcolm X. After several meetings, Haley asked Malcolm X to tell him something about his mother. That question drew Malcolm into recounting his life story. The autobiography of Malcolm X has been a consistent bestseller since its 1965 publication. The New York Times reported that 6 million copies of the book had sold by 1977. The 1998 Time ranked the autobiography of Malcolm X as one of the 10 most influential nonfiction books of the 20th century. And in 1966, Haley received a Anisfield Wolf Book Award for the autobiography of Malcolm X. All right. So it says this one is called Superfly TNT. In 1973, Haley wrote his only screenplay, Superfly TNT. The film starred and was directed by Ron O'Neal. Now let's talk about his book, The Roots. All right, in 1976, Haley published The Roots, the Saga of an American Family, a novel based on his family history going back to slavery days. It started with the story of Kunta Kinte, who was kidnapped in the Gambia in 1767 and transported to the province of Maryland to be sold as a slave. Haley claimed to be a seven generation descendant of Kunta Kinte, and his work on the novel involved 12 years of research into continental travel and writing. He went to the village of Jufure, where Kunta Kinte grew up, and listened to a tribal historian, Griot, telling the story of Kinte's capture. Haley also traced the records of the ship, the Lord Ligner, which he had carried his ancestors to the Americas. All right. And it says Haley has stated that the most emotional moment of his life occurred on September 29th, 1967, when he stood at the site in Annapolis, Maryland, where his ancestor had arrived from Africa in chains exactly 200 years before. A memorial depicting Haley reading a story to young children gathered at his feet has since been erected in the center of Annapolis. Now it says Roots was eventually published in 37 languages. Haley won a special Pulitzer Prize for the work in 1977. The same year, Roots was adapted as a popular television miniseries of the same name by ABC. The serial reached a record-breaking of 130 million viewers. Roots emphasized that Black Americans have a long history, and not all of that history is necessarily lost, as many believe. Its popularity also sparked a greatly increased public interest in genealogy. And in 1979, ABC aired the sequel miniseries, Roots, The Next Generation, which continued the story of Kunta Kinte's descendant. It concluded with Haley's travel to Jufure. Haley was portrayed at different ages by Christophe St. John, the Jefferson actor Damian Evans, Tony Award winner James Earl Jones in 2016 history, and aired a remake of the original miniseries. Haley appeared briefly, portrayed by Tony Award winner Lauren Fishburne. All right, it says Haley was briefly a writer in residence at Hamilton College in Clinton, New York, where he began work on Roots. He enjoyed spending time at a local bistro called the Suavo in nearby Rome, where he would sometimes pass the time listening to the piano player. Today, there is a special table in honor of Haley at the Savo, and a painting of Haley writing Roots on a yellow legal tablet. All right. So we're going to look at the lawsuit about the book. All right, so but let's skip on down. to later life and death. All right, so early in the 1980s, Haley worked with the Walt Disney Company to develop an Equatorial Africa pavilion for its Epcot Center theme park. Haley appeared on a CBS broadcast for Epcot Center's opening day celebration, discussing the plan and exhibiting concept art with the host Danny Kaye. Ultimately, the pavilion was not built due to political and financial issues. And late in the 1970s, Haley had begun work on a second historical novel based on another branch of his family traced through his grandmother, Queen. She was the daughter of a black slave woman and her white master. He did not finish the novel before dying in Seattle, Washington of a heart attack. He was buried beside his childhood home in Henny, Tennessee. At his request, the novel was finished by David Stevens and was published as Alice Haley's Queen. It was subsequently adapted as a miniseries of the same name in 1993. All right. It says, late in Haley's life, he had acquired a small farm in Clinton, Tennessee, although at the time it had a North Tennessee address. The farm is a few miles from the Museum of Appalachia, and Haley lived there until his death. After his death, the property was sold to the Children Defense Fund, which called it the Alice Haley Farm. The nonprofit organization used the farm as a national training center and retreat site. An abandoned barn on the farm property was rebuilt as a traditional was it cantilevered barn using a design architect Maya Lin. The building now serves as a library for the CDF. Okay. All right, and so that's his statue right there in Annapolis, Maryland. Annapolis, Maryland. Right here. All right, and that's his grave site. Right here. He was buried right beside the home that he grew up in. Okay, so let's talk about the lawsuit that he received about the Roots plagiarism. Okay, so Roots plagiarism suit is settled. All right, this came out on December 15, 1978 on New York Times. Okay, so check this out. It says about the archive. This is a digitalized version of an article from the Times print archive before the start of online publication in 1996. To preserve these articles as they originally appeared, the Times does not alter, edit, or update them. Occasionally, the digitalization process introduces transcription errors or other problems. We are continuing to work to improve these archive versions. All right. So it says Alice Haley settled a lawsuit yesterday by acknowledging that his world-renowned book Roots contains some material from a relatively unknown novel about slavery that was published 9 years earlier. The settlement ended the 6-week trials of a suit by Harold Courtlander, a 70-year-old author from Bethesda, Maryland, who contended there were substantial similarities between Roots and his own earlier novel, The African. He sued in federal district court in Manhattan for more than half the profits of Roots. As the trial was about to reach a climax with summation by the opposing lawyers, they issued the following statement. The suit has been amicably settled out of court. Alice Haley acknowledged and regret that fictitious materials from The African by Harold Courtlander found their way into his book Roots. Under the agreement to settle, the amount of money that will be paid to Mr. Courtlander and his publisher Crown was not disclosed, but the nature of the case made it seem likely that the amount would be hundreds of thousands of dollars. Okay. So There was some form of plagiarism in the book from another author who previously wrote a book called The African. But let's go on. It said the defendants in the suit were Mr. Haley and his publisher, Doubleday and Dale. The American Broadcasting Company, which televised Roots, was dropped as a defendant by a mutual agreement earlier in the trial. Roots rapidly became enormously successful after it was published in 1976. It won a Pulitzer Prize, sold millions of copies, and produced a series of television programs that exerted a powerful impact throughout the country. In contrast, The African sold 14,000 copies in hardcover and 130,000 in paperback during several years after its publication in 1967. It says Judge Robert J. Ward, who conducted the trial without a jury, proposed a settlement a few weeks ago after Mr. Courtlander's lawyer, Robert N. Kaplan, presented the case for the plaintiffs, but the defense lawyer, George Berger and Robert Kalagi, rejected the proposal. After the negotiation on the proposal broke down, the defense lawyers moved a mistrial, arguing that the judge had proposed a settlement for an amount that they had rejected. The amount was not disclosed, but the defense lawyers said it raised a question about whether the judge could continue the trial with impartiality. All right. And then it goes on to talk about Judge Ward, stressing his impartiality, ruled that the trial would continue. He had made it clear at the opening of the trial that the key issue would be whether there is a substantial similarity between Roots and The African. A similar case was dismissed last September by Judge Marvin E. Frankel, who ruled that there were only insignificant similarities between Roots and 1966 novel called Jubilee that had been written by Margaret Walker Alexander, a professor at Jackson State College in Mississippi. The book by Dr. Alexander, who is one of the country's most respected Black writers, was based on what she described as the true story of her great-grandmother. She said her book depicted Black life in Georgia before, during, and after the Civil War. Her suit, which was filed in Manhattan in April 1977, alleged that parts of Roots had been largely copied from her book. At the same time, Mr. Courtlander reported that Roots contained some striking similarities to his book, and he filed his suit the next month. Wow. So, let's go on then. It goes on to say that Mr. Haley testified in his own defense, vehemently denied that he had taken any of the plot or characters in Roots from The African. He said that his book was based on the story of my own maternal family through 7 generations from Africa to America. Okay, so Haley conceded 3 passages. According to Mr. Haley, who is 57 years old and lives in the Los Angeles, he had never heard of The African until after Roots had been published. But he conceded that 3 brief passages in his book had apparently come from the earlier book. The passages were identified by Mr. Haley as reference to Kunta, grandfather, page 225 of Roots. Kunta awakened more lighthearted on page 321, and a camp meeting on page 369. He explained that someone must have given the passage to him without attributing them to the African. Many people gave him handwritten notes and other material while he was doing his extensive research, Mr. Haley said, and student volunteers went through some of the material to find anything that might be useful to him. Somewhere, he added, somebody gave me something that came from The African. That's the best honest explanation I can give. 3 passages mentioned by Mr. Haley were cited by Mr. Kaplan, the lawyer for the plaintiffs, who also referred to a number of other passages that had allegedly been copied. And an example cited by Mr. Kaplan concerned a field call used by plantation slave in the African. He said that the key words are well, you-hoo. Oh, well, Yahoo. Don't you hear me calling you? A similar incident occurred in the Roots manuscript. He continued, and it says, from the road not long after, the field hands heard a rising, lingering same song, Yahoo. Spelled the, I say, you, was it Yahoo, Ahoo? Oh, Yahoo, Ahoo, my bad. Yahoo, Ahoo. Spelled the same way. Don't you hear me calling you? Oh, wow. So it was a case of, okay, Alice Haley, when he wrote the books, The Roots, right? He had other people helping him to write. So he wasn't just the only one that was doing it. So he had student volunteers that was supposed to get some information, gather up something that was going to help him to put the books together while he was on his long trip, journey in Africa, looking up for his genealogy and all of that. And so someone must have took some information, some passages out the book of the African, and gave it to Mr. Haley and said, here, you can use this, right? Without telling him that this is where the source came from. So, that's something serious. That's why you have to be careful when you're writing books. You got to be careful when you're just plagiarizing, whether it be a fictitious novel or a non-fiction novel, right? You have to be careful, because if you get caught with plagiarism, that's a lawsuit, and that's a serious lawsuit at that. So let's look up the name of the book called The African. Who was it written by? Let's look up that book, The African, by Harold. Okay, so this was the book right here, The African, that was written by Harold Courtlander, and it was said to be that this is where Alice Haley plagiarized some of his work from right here. And let's see who is Harold Courtlander. Give me a second. I want to know. Okay, so this is supposed to be Harold Courtlander right here. Let's look a little bit at his biography. That's him. Let's see who he was. All right, so real fast. This is Harold Courtlander right here. Now, this is Harold Courtlander. Now, what does it say about him? Was an American novelist, folklorist, and anthropologist, and an expert in study of Haitian life. The author of 35 books and plays and numerous scholarly articles, Cortlander specialized in the study of African, Caribbean, Afro-American, and Native American cultures. He took a special interest in oral literatures, cults, and African American cultural connection with Africa. Mm, okay. So so yeah, this is his story right here. And this is him. You can find him up on wikipedia.com right here. That's interesting. Let me see. Hmm. Okay, so anyways, let's go on to the next. So there is a masjid that has opened up in Gambia, right? And Jufari, Gambia. It was named after Alice Haley, right here. And it says early in the spring of 1750, in this tiny village upriver from the coast of the Gambia, Kunta was born. He was the first man child of Amario and Benta Kinte. The world came to know him through the book and international television saga Roots, written by American-born Alice Haley in the 1970s. Mr. Haley's genealogical research led him here when he discovered his paternal ancestry. Okay. And it says 2 years ago, his world friendship tour 3, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan discovered that Mr. Haley desired to build a small mosque for the village resident. He gave some money to the former governor of the Gambia. However, the project never emerged. Minister Farrakhan promised the people of Jaruf that he would fulfill Alice Haley's vision and build not only a mosque but a school as well. On the birth on the birthday of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, or Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, a delegation of officials and members of the Nation Islam, as well as Christian friends, boarded a small yacht and sailed the river Gambia to Jarufer to join in opening ceremony of the Alice Haley Mosque and School Complex on June 25th of 1998. The delegation crossing, however, was luxurious by any comparison to the ghastly ordeal endured by Kunta Kinte, his companions, and all of those other millions endured during the transatlantic trip to the New World. All right. So, according to this article, right? And let's read down here. It says, shortly after Brother Mustafa's speech, Mother Khadija with Binta Kinte, an 81-year-old descendant of Kunta Kinte, by her side, cut the ribbon to the mosque in immense cheers, clapping and dancing. The call to prayer was made, and the village of the Jarufer, along with their Muslim brothers and sisters from America, gathered in mosque for the first time for Juma prayer service. Attendees include Jarufa Chief Taku Tau, the family of Kunta Kinte, Osman Jallo, a member of the Gambia's parliament, Ahaj Kante, commissioner of North Bank Division, Imam Karamo, Imam Tamasir Cisse from Senegal, Imam Khalifa Dabou from Albreda, representative from the staff of Sheikh Hassan Cisse of Senegal, and Imam Alege Jameh from Sina Sintanuku. The khutbah was delivered by Imam Omar Dabo Jaref. So, what's surprising is that Farrakhan and his family helped fund the opening of the masjid in Gambia, in Jaru, Gambia, named the Alice Haley Mosque in school. And that's where his descendant Kunta Kinte is from. So I thought that Kunta Kinte, to be honest with you, was just a fictional character that, you know, Alice Haley was using in his book to describe a family member of his without giving an actual name. But I didn't know it was an actual person named Kunta Kinte. Didn't even know that, but now I know. Okay, I know. That's very interesting. Very interesting and surprising. So I'm still curious about this Harold Cortland guy. You know, to me, I thought he was biracial. I wonder if he's biracial or if he's actually a Caucasian guy. I'm just curious. So yeah, I'm real curious about this person right here. I'm gonna look up more information about him one day. Yeah, just to find out more of his work and what he has done and put it on the forefront. All right. But yeah, there's a masjid in Gambia that's named after Alice Haley. Okay. So let's look a little bit more about his story. This article is called Black History, Oral History and Genealogy by Alice Haley. Okay. And this is what he wrote. He put, when I was a little boy, I lived in a little town which you probably never heard of called Henny, Tennessee, about 50 miles north of Memphis. And I lived there with my parents in the home of my mother's mother. And my grandmother and I were very, very close. Every summer that I can remember growing up there in Henny, my grandmother would have as visitors members of the family who were always women, always her general age range, the late 40s, early 50s. They came from places that sounded pretty exotic to me. Dyersburg, Tennessee, with Inkster, Michigan, places like that. St. Louis, Kansas City, they were like cousin Georgia, Aunt Plus, Aunt Liz, so forth. And every evening after the supper dishes were washed, they would go out on the front porch and sit in cane bottom rock chairs, and I would always sit behind grandma's chair. And every single evening of those summers, unless there was some particularly hot gossip that would overrule it, they would talk about otherwise the self same thing. It was bits and pieces and patches of what I later would learn was a long narrative history of the family, which had been passed down literally across generations. Okay. So that's what inspired him to go and learn about his roots, because of his upbringing and, you know, listen to the stories from his grandmother. All right. Okay. So then it goes on to say that I think that my first impression that these things, they spoke of when a long way back came from the fact that they were wrinkled, gray, or completely gray in some cases. I was a little boy, 3, 4, 5, and now then when some of them would get animatedly talking about something, they would flinging their finger or a hand down towards me and say something like I wasn't any bigger than this youngin here. And the very idea that someone as old as and wrinkled as she had had at one time had been no older than I was just blew my mind. I knew it must be way, way back that they were talking about. And when they were speaking of this African, the first back person of all, they would tell how he was brought on the ship to this country to a place they pronounced at Napolis. And he was brought off this ship by a man whose name was John Waller, who had a plantation in a place called Spotsylvania County, Virginia. And then they would tell how he was on this plantation and he kept trying to escape. The first 3 times he escaped, he was caught and given a worse beating than previously as his punishment. And then the 4th time he escaped, he had the misfortune to be caught by a professional slave catcher. And I grew up hearing how this slave catcher decided to make an example of him. And I grew up hearing how he gave the African the choice either to be castrated or have a foot cut off. Oh. And the African chose the foot. And I grew up hearing how his foot was put up against a stump with an axe was cut off across the arch. It was a very hideous act, but it turned out that act was to play a very major role in the keeping of a narrative down across a family for a long time. Okay. Then he goes on to say, the reasons were 2. One of them was that in the middle 1700s in Virginia, almost all slaves were sold at auction. A male slave in good condition would bring on the average about $750. At the end of every slave auction, they would have what they call the scrap sale, and those who were incapacitated, ill, or otherwise not so valuable for market would be sold generally for amounts of $100 or less in cash. And this particular African managed to survive and then to convalescent, and he posed then to his master an economic question. And his master decided that he was crippled and hobbled about. But he still could do limited work. And the master decided that he would be worth more kept on the plantation than he would be worth sold away for cash of less than $100. And that's how it was happening, that this particular African was kept on one plantation for a quite long period of time. All right. So he's giving his account and his story of what inspired him. So that what inspired him to write the stories about the roots, because he had heard many stories about a slave based on his grandmother's interaction, right? He would hear stories about it, and then he was so curious to know about this guy. So later he discovered that this guy was Kunta Kinte, his grandfather or his descendant that was brought here to America. So that was his autobiography, right, which is called Black History, Oral History, and Genealogy. All right, and you can look it up online. You can go on tnfonline.com and look up Oral History Review. And when did he write this? It doesn't say when he wrote it. Okay, he wrote this article in 1973. Yeah, he wrote this article in 1973. So you guys can look it up for yourself. All right. There's the information right here. Okay. So other than that, with that being said, I thank you guys for watching this video. That was like a very interesting history about Mr. Alice Haley, going into more detail. Alice Haley has shown that, you know, if he can go out there and discover his roots, going on a long journey, traveling, and getting stories from the griots from themselves, then anybody else can do it, you know. And by his book, which became a mini series, The Roots had viewers over 150 million. That goes to show you that African culture and history was very, something serious back then. And this is in the 70s, the late 70s at that. So Alice Haley had a great idea. He had a good idea, and he understood history, right? Just by encountering his own history. Now, some people may argue that, well, that's not his story, that he took it from somebody else. Okay, you can argue that there was some plagiarism in the book, but for the most part, we know that the story about his great grandfather, we confirmed that he was from Gambia, and not to mention, he was from the area which now the masjid, which is named after Mr. Haley. So he took some of the stories what he learned from the griots and combined it into this book. So overall, it gives a true account of the African American experience and the descendants of African Americans. It gives a true account. It gives a story of how our ancestors came a long way from their villages to being in this land. So if you guys have not checked the book, please do so. Also check the autobiography of Malcolm X by him as well, which was written in 1965. This was written in 1976. And I'm gonna also look up the book about the Queen and look up the mini series. Hopefully I could be able to find that online. Look that up as well. So, but I'm more interested in the book. So I'm gonna look up the book and read that book and whatnot. But this is why we have to talk about, it's good that we talk about ancient Egypt, which is cool. But we also got to talk about the African in the diaspora, especially here in America, because a lot of us don't know enough about our history here in America as African people, or African descendant rather. We, of course, we got to talk about West Africa, but see, people don't want to touch on West African history because they know that they got to talk about slavery. And yes, slavery is something very horrifying, but you cannot get away from it. You cannot get away from that because that's a part of the experience that Africans had to go through. That's a part of that. So it's just more to it than just spirituality, music, and the dress and whatnot. You got to talk about the horrifying things that took place as well. So with that being said, thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate that a lot. And if you want to support the channel, go ahead and share and subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can also go ahead and share this video as well. So until then, I will talk to you guys later. May peace and power elevation be to all you. Please be safe out there and be careful. And other than that, deuces. All right then. Take it easy. Thank you.